Hello, and I'm back for another video on. I've titled this pair of videos "Life, Science, and Religion," and I'm basically trying to talk about or introduce discussions about um, reality and the universe and religion. As I've said before, I'm a Muslim, but I think it's quite nice to the idea of hearing Muslims talk about um, those topics as well as religion itself. But um, yeah, the previous video, I think pretty much the last thing I was talking about was aliens and various topics in science and various different religions that I've been looking into and studying and learning about over the last 5 to 10 years. So I'm just going to go from there, but I haven't wrote any of this down. It's just off the top of my head and it's kind of freestyling it. So forgive me if it comes out a bit ranty at times, but I'm just going to do the best I can. So yeah, with regards to science, obviously there there's a lot of different areas in science that you can talk about. Obviously, at a base level, you've got physics, chemistry, and biology. Each area of science has its own interesting and different approaches to different areas of science. For example, organisms and evolution in biology and stuff like that. Physics and the planets and exoplanets and galaxies and quantum mechanics, which is the study of the universe at the smallest level. So like you've got particles, atoms, and photons, electrons, and things like the double slit experiment, and some pretty crazy, interesting stuff when it comes to when you get to look at the universe at such a small scale, and how it behaves and how particles behave and stuff like that. And chemistry, which is obviously the chemistry of the universe that we live in. Um, with me, what I did was basically when I started studying science, I just wanted to. I have a business, so I work at um, my everyday business, which is a cleaning business called Glowfresh Cleaning Services, and I do carpet and upholstery cleaning and things like that. So it's pretty like bog standard business as far as being self-employed and working in that sense. But I've been doing that for 10 years, and I decided at one point that I was going to try and learn a new um, a new thing at the same time as um, uh, working. Then when I finish work, I would be able to study subjects rather than just playing video games or hanging around or whatever. So what I basically did was I decided that I was going to um, learn as I went and found subjects in science that I found interesting. So, for example, if I'm at work one day and somebody's talking to me about science and black holes and aliens, I would then go away and study black holes and aliens, and then I have like a base knowledge on those specific subjects. So my science knowledge basically is quite varied, but I tend to have a bit of knowledge in all the most interesting areas, if that makes sense. But I also like philosophy and religion, so I tend to, when I talk about stuff like this or when I think about it, I tend to try and bridge gaps between science because there's only so much science that we actually know at this point. We we know certain things, but we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. We don't know where the aliens are or if they exist. And we don't know, like for example, dark matter and dark energy. We don't know what it is or why it's there, but we know it's there because it interacts with other energies like light. I mean, so there's a lot we don't know, and it gets pretty scary at certain points because of just how much we don't know. But we also there's obviously a lot that can be learned and researched in science that's interesting. Um, for example, communication is an interesting topic because communication is a good place to start when it comes to talking about things like this because communication is basically the main reason that human beings are so successful on this planet. Um, our ability to communicate with each other among large groups makes us more successful than the other animals and creatures on the planet. That's why we're ahead of them in the sense that we build things and we don't need to hunt in the same way anymore. We have agriculture and gatherings and processed food and vehicles and buildings to live in and stuff like that because we can communicate much better and then via communication organize better systems in better systems to then create and build and invent things. So it seems like a good place to start, which is making YouTube videos, which is now a super accessible um, way to communicate, and you can communicate a large amount of information specifically for people to cherry pick at their own pace. So it's I mean, this is a much more laid back approach to talking about science and religion and philosophy than, for example, if you go onto Richard Dawkins or Brian Cox's YouTube channels, they have a much more formal way of talking about science, I guess you would say. But I sometimes think that science only goes so far. Like at certain points, for example, if you talk about space and astrophysics and the universe and planets and suns and moons and everything else in between, if you're sort of looking up at the night sky and you've got stars and planets and everything else, you can say, well, if we have a telescope, we can view the planets and everything else, and we can identify them, and we can say that this planet is made of this and has this atmosphere and has this amount of gravity compared to Earth and has gas or doesn't have what gases are there and different things like that, and if that planet how close it is to other planets and that sort of thing, from what we know about our solar system and the galaxy. But then at a certain point, I feel like people get stopped, and sometimes it's good to use other tools like philosophy or religion to bridge those gaps, which I think people don't maybe do enough. There's no rule that says you can't use science and philosophy together. Um, so I can say, obviously, looking up at the night sky, I can see the planet Saturn and the ring around it. It's incredible, and we know what the ring's made of and how far away from Earth Saturn is, and the likelihood that we'll ever get to Saturn or what it would take, what kind of a spacecraft and amounts of fuel it would take to get to Saturn and back, and how many years from now it would take us to be able to get to Saturn, basically, or Venus, or any of the other planets, or exoplanets. Um, but that might not be in the foreseeable future, so it can help then to fall back on philosophy or religion to say, to talk about the beauty of those planets and space from our home planet of Earth, and how small we feel then in comparison to the universe or the galaxy, and just the majestic beauty of viewing the solar system from Earth, whether you're using a telescope or not. Which then, to me, that's bridging from science to philosophy, but you don't really need to even put that much thought into it for it to work. It works in its own way, I think. If you're a Muslim, like I'm a Muslim, you can you have the tools to just look up at the night sky and appreciate the beauty of the cosmos and the galaxies and the planets and stuff and the stars. And you know that for thousands of years, your people that came before you, and the Muslims and the people that came before you, you know that they, at some point, perhaps in the same spot that you're stood, did the same thing, and some of them were good enough to name those objects as celestial objects and offer either religious, philosophical, or scientific opinions and theories on that kind of thing. For example, I believe that they used to have names for the stars and the planets, like they were gods and spirits, and different cultures from different places around the world have very interesting and varied views on the night sky and what those stars were and what they meant from day one up until now. So yeah, but then we know that we have rovers and probes on Mars. So we know that Elon Musk and SpaceX, as well as NASA and stuff, are working on Mars and the possibility that we'll eventually live on or have a base on Mars where people can live and work and study. I mean, that's happening right now. So we have Mars rovers actively looking around Mars, the planet Mars, right now. So in a sense, we are there. We can see the planet close up, and we know that there's a drone flying around and a rover that's taking core samples, and with a laboratory on board and sending that information back to Earth for us to analyse. We also know that they found water on the moon, so we know that there's water on the moon, and we know that they're planning to build a base on the moon as a kind of jumping point. So what the idea there is for us to, instead of sending a spaceship from the Earth's surface into space and then to Mars or wherever else, it'll go from Earth to the moon, which has water in the form of ice, which would then be transformed into jet fuel, hydrogen, and used to refuel and then set off towards Mars or other places, which means we don't have to carry as large of a fuel payload from Earth into space, because it takes a lot of fuel to get from Earth's surface into the atmosphere and into space. So we'll save a lot of time and energy and money, I guess, going to the moon first and going from there. But there'll be people working and living on the moon. Um, that's not science fiction. That's genuine science. People are. That's happening. They'll have a full surveillance system and laboratories and fueling stations for spaceships and everything else in a not too distant future, which is extremely exciting because it just shows how far we've come from the first things that were sent into space to now where we're starting to think about building actual bases. We have the International Space Station, which is um, great, and like you said, rovers on Mars. So yeah, it's interesting. But going back to communication, an interesting point with regards to communication is non-verbal communication. Some people call it telepathy or stuff like that. So, but if you look at animals and creatures, um, animals have their own way of communicating with each other, and there's a lot we don't know about what they actually communicate, like, or how they approach things, because it's safe to say that we have the best communication skills than any other animals, but we don't know with the communication skills that they have what fully what they're communicating all the time. For example, this is something I said before, but um, a bumblebee who collects pollen and then takes it back to the hive and then it gets converted into honey. We we could say that it's a possibility that that honeybee, the process of going from the hive to find a flower and collect the pollen and then turning it into honey, is something comparable to a spiritual experience. For example, we know that the honeybee can navigate to and from where it gets the pollen, but we don't know what that honeybee's thinking or feeling fully. Like it, it could be a really almost religious, or spiritual experience for them rather than just a job. If you think about a human being, you wake up in the morning and then you clean yourself and you pray and you eat and you speak to your partner and then you drive yourself to work, you listen to music. It's not just a case of you wake up and you pop yourself into work and you're like a robot. So there's a lot of different elements that go into you being able to go to work and work efficiently, like your religious practices and what you eat and how you think, and in order just for you to keep yourself happy enough and spiritually balanced to be able to work the way you want to work. So it's safe to say, and it's interesting to think about how things, other creatures like bees, for example, approach the same sort of thing. We know that a bee works with other bees in a hive to make honey, but does that? How close to a spiritual, religious experience is that process to a bee? To us, obviously, it's either just a mundane thing we don't think about, or if we're studying the subject, it can be obviously scientific and interesting. But to that bee, um, working with other bees and collecting pollen and creating honey could be the most spiritual experience of its existence. It could be 100% comparable to a religious experience to us, um, which is interesting, and how the bees communicate with each other to work so efficiently in the process of making honey is comparable to how good we are at communicating. But it's, I mean, it's non-verbal communication between the bees in the sense of how we verbalize communication, but there's obviously a complex communication system there for them to be able to do that. So it's very interesting to think about, and I'm coming to the end of this video now, but I'm going to make a third, a part 3, and go into that sort of thing a little bit more. So yeah, I'll make another video soon. Cool, thank you.